Imagine a deity once worshipped perhaps for protection against disease or as a powerful prince. Then imagine its name being deliberately twisted, turned into the demeaning Lord of the Flies or even Lord of Dung, and that's just the beginning of this incredible story. In this video, we'll uncover how this ancient god was transformed into a symbol of absolute evil, why he was called the Lord of the Flies and the hidden meaning behind it, how he became a prince of demons, capable of striking fear into entire cities, and the chilling legacy he left on world culture. Prepare to delve into a centuries-long story of transformation that proves that sometimes the most terrifying demons are born from the most unexpected of places. And these unexpected places take us back to the very heart of antiquity, to the cusp of the 12th and 10th centuries BCE, to the fertile, yet often harsh, lands of ancient Palestine. Here, among the thriving cities of the Philistines whose secrets are still carefully guarded by archaeological digs, stood the city of Ekron. And Ekron had its own mighty patron god, whose name was Baal-Zebub. To our modern ears, this name sounds strange, to say the least, if not downright sinister. Baal-Zebub literally translates to Lord of the Flies. Wait a minute, you might say a powerful deity of the ancient world associated with such seemingly insignificant and even repulsive creatures. It seems absurd, but therein lies the very depth of the mystery. To unravel it, we must step back and immerse ourselves in the mindset of the people of that era, where the line between the sacred and the mundane wasn't just thin. It was practically non-existent. In the ancient world, gods were not abstract, distant entities. They were living, tangible forces, deeply intertwined with the daily life of humanity, with the rhythms of nature, the harvest, drought, sickness, and healing. And flies, strangely enough, were a ubiquitous and significant part of this world. They swarmed over marketplaces, battlefields, food, and corpses. They were associated with decay and decomposition, with all things unclean, but at the same time, they were an integral part of the natural cycle, acting as a kind of sanitation crew, swiftly consuming dead flesh and organic waste. It is from this context that the first and perhaps most plausible theory about the meaning of Lord of the Flies emerges. Picture the hot climate of the East, the complete absence of modern hygiene, and the widespread nature of infections and epidemics that could wipe out entire cities. In such conditions, flies that consumed the rotting flesh of animals or humans could have been seen as key agents in preventing the spread of contagion by clearing away the filth that bred disease. In this light, Baal-Zebub could have been a revered protector deity, invoked to ward off plagues, to bring healing, and to shield against epidemics. He was the one who commanded these ever-present yet vital creatures, directing their power for the good of mankind, not its harm. Thus, Lord of the Flies was not a derogatory nickname at all, but an honorary title, indicating his dominion over the forces of nature that directly impacted the health and well-being of the entire community. This was a god who could tame chaos and ward off disease. But there is another, no less fascinating interpretation that leads us into the world of prophecy and mysticism. Ancient deities often served as oracles, sources of divine messages that guided the path or foretold the future. Perhaps Baal-Zebub was such an oracle god whose revelations, his prophecies, were carried like the persistent, inescapable buzzing of a great swarm of flies, filling the ears and penetrating the deepest corners of the listener's mind. This version gives the name a more mystical, even shamanistic, quality, speaking to his ability to enter one's consciousness, to disturb its peace in order to reveal the secrets of what was to come. After all, even today, a nagging thought or a buzzing in the ears is often associated with an idea that won't leave you alone. Finally, we cannot ignore the powerful linguistic wordplay that may have radically altered the perception of this deity. There is a very compelling theory that the word Zebub fly was not the original term, but a deliberate distortion or a derogatory pun on the far more ancient and respectable word Zebul. In Semitic languages, Zebul means prince, exalted one, lord, or even house in the sense of a princely house or shrine. If this theory is correct, then the original Baal-Zebub was not the lord of the flies at all, but the exalted prince or great lord, a deity of very high rank, perhaps the patron of a dynasty, the supreme god of Ekron, or even Baal, the lord of the heavens. The demeaning suffix fly would have been added later during bitter intercultural and religious conflicts, particularly by the Hebrew prophets, to deliberately belittle a foreign god, strip him of his majesty, and turn him into something loathsome and unworthy of worship. It was a powerful tool of propaganda, a way to demonize the deities of other nations. For now, though, in this ancient world where Baal-Zebub was the rightful protector of Ekron, he was part of a complex yet logical system of belief designed to explain the world, overcome its challenges, and find protection. He was a god to whom people turned in their hour of need, whose name carried the promise of healing, fertility, or prophetic answers. This original form, closely tied to the forces of nature and daily life, bears little resemblance to the terrifying prince of demons that Beelzebub would later become. But it was here, in the dusty ruins of ancient Ekron, amidst the buzzing of real flies, and the whispers of ancient faiths, that this incredible transformation began from patron to pariah, from deity to demon, whose name was destined to echo through the millennia. But this journey through the millennia was not a voluntary one. It was paved by an act of profound, almost sacred, condemnation. The turning point came in the 9th century BCE, when Philistine cities like Ekron still clung to their ancient beliefs, but the powerful kingdom of Israel was rising nearby. It was during this period, at the crossroads of cultures and religions, that an encounter took place that would forever alter the fate of Baal-Zebub, turning him from a revered deity into an object of ridicule and contempt. On the throne of Israel sat King Ahaziah, son of the infamous Ahab. One day he fell through the lattice of his upper chamber in Samaria and was gravely injured. In his desperation, perhaps distrusting or finding no answer from his own priests, Ahaziah made a decision that would prove fatal for Baal-Zebub's reputation. He sent messengers to the Philistine city of Ekron with an order to inquire of its local god Baal-Zebub whether he would recover. Ekron, located on the coast of ancient Palestine, was one of the 5 major cities of the Philistines, and Baal-Zebub was considered its mighty protector. The name Baal-Zebub literally translates to Lord of the Flies. This could have pointed to his role in protecting against diseases and pests, which were often carried by flies in the hot climate where decay was a daily reality. He might have been an oracle god whose prophecies buzzed or whispered like a swarm of insects. However, there is that other, more intriguing theory, that Zebub was a distortion of the more ancient word Zebul, meaning prince or exalted. If so, the original meaning of the name could have been Lord Prince or Exalted Lord, a perfectly majestic title for a city's deity. It was to this Lord of the Flies, or Exalted Prince, that King Ahaziah's messengers went, but their journey was cut short. They were met by the prophet Elijah, one of the most zealous and fearsome prophets of Yahweh, who tolerated no worship of foreign gods. Elijah, moved by divine indignation, stopped them with a question. Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to inquire of Baal-Zebub, the god of Ekron? This question was not a mere rebuke. It was a powerful divine condemnation. The prophet declared to the messengers that for turning to an idol instead of the true God of Israel, King Ahaziah would not leave the bed on which he lay, but would surely die. And indeed, when the messengers returned and delivered the message, Ahaziah died, just as Elijah had foretold. This episode, the only mention of Baal-Zebub in the Hebrew Bible, became the starting point of his demonization. In the eyes of Judean tradition, Baal-Zebub was no longer just a foreign god. He became a false, powerless, and even despicable embodiment of evil. His association with flies, traditionally linked to filth, disease, and decay, was emphasized and used to desecrate him. It is highly likely that the name Baal-Zebub, Lord of the Flies, was itself a derogatory pun, deliberately altered or chosen by the Hebrew authors of the Bible to mock the Philistine deity. If the original name was indeed Baal-Zebul, Lord Prince, House, then the change to Baal-Zebub was an act of calculated humiliation, transforming a majestic god into something repulsive, associated with insects that carry filth. This was cultural and religious disarmament, to strip a deity of his power by making him an object of ridicule, linking him to the most base and despised things. Instead of being a protector from flies, he became their master, the lord of decomposition and corruption. Thus, thanks to a single biblical episode and the sharp words of the prophet Elijah, the Philistine deity Baal-Zebub took his first decisive step toward becoming a fearsome prince of demons. From a local patron whose name may have once meant prince, he was demoted to Lord of the Flies, a symbol of Hebrew contempt for all foreign gods, laying the foundation for his future far darker and more powerful role in demonology. This transformation from divinity to disgust was only the beginning. Centuries passed. The Phoenician cities were wiped from the face of the earth, their gods' names fading into whispers of history. But for one of them, oblivion gave way to a twisted ascension. In the 1st century CE, when the deserts of the Middle East were already steeped in the stories of the New Covenant, the ancient Philistine deity, once known as Baal-Zebub, reappeared on the stage, but now under the Hellenized, far more sinister name Beelzebul. He was no longer just the local deity of Ekron to whom the unfortunate King Ahaziah had turned for healing. His status had grown to terrifying proportions. In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Beelzebul appears as a figure of exceptional importance in the hierarchy of evil. He is not just a demon, but the prince of demons, or even the ruler of demons. His name is now uttered with a shudder, signifying the highest rank in the legions of darkness, a commander of hordes of unclean spirits. The context of his mention in the New Testament is critically important. This is not a simple list of demonic names. Beelzebul becomes a central figure in one of the sharpest clashes between Jesus and his opponents, the Pharisees and scribes. Unable to deny his obvious miracles, they accuse Jesus of casting out demons not by the power of God, but by Beelzebul, the prince of demons. This accusation was a direct challenge, an attempt to discredit his authority by linking it to the highest powers of darkness. Imagine the scene: Jesus casting out unclean spirits with a single word, and opposite him, the skeptical religious leaders whose pride prevents them from acknowledging the source of his power. They know that exorcism is an act of incredible might, so to slander Jesus, they had to associate that might with the greatest of all dark forces, with the recognized head of the demonic world. They named Beelzebul, and it was no random choice. It was an acknowledgement of his power, even if it came from the mouths of those trying to condemn him. Jesus, of course, brilliantly refutes this accusation. He uses logic that cannot be disputed. Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and no city or house divided against itself will stand. And if Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then will his kingdom stand? These words are more than just a denial. They indirectly but powerfully confirm the very high status his opponents attributed to Beelzebul. Jesus does not dispute that Beelzebul is the head of a kingdom of evil. On the contrary, he acknowledges its power but uses it as an argument in his own favor. The devil would not destroy his own kingdom. Thus, it is in the New Testament, through a confrontation with divine power, that Beelzebul is definitively cemented in the public consciousness as a key figure in emerging Christian demonology. He is no longer just the Lord of the Flies, a name uttered with contempt. He becomes a powerful adversary, a prince of darkness at the head of legions of evil, whose authority is so great that even Jesus' accusers could find no more influential name to associate with incredible displays of spiritual power. This chapter of his story is an ascension from the ancient Philistine dust to a throne of infernal majesty, a transformation from a half-forgotten god into one of the most recognizable and terrifying demons in the Western tradition. And this was only the beginning of his long and dark journey through the ages of demonology. And that journey led him not into oblivion, but straight to the very heart of hell's hierarchy. If early mentions depicted Beelzebub merely as the prince of demons, the Middle Ages, and the Renaissance elevated him to unprecedented heights, making him one of the most powerful and influential princes of the underworld. Now, he didn't just stand beside the fallen Lightbringer Lucifer, but often held a place in the top triumvirate of hellish monarchs, sharing power with Leviathan, the ancient sea monster and embodiment of chaos, and the Lord of Darkness himself. His name became synonymous not just with evil, but with all-encompassing decay, both physical and moral. This transformation reflected a profound shift in the human perception of evil, which was no longer seen as merely something external, but as a force that penetrates the very essence of being, corroding it from within. What led to such an elevation? His roots, connected to flies, rot, and decomposition, logically tied Beelzebub to the sin of gluttony. Flies swarming around spoiled food became a sinister symbol of unrestrained consumption, uncontrolled desires, and moral decay. He became the personification of gluttony not only for food, but for an insatiable hunger for power, wealth, and anything that could corrupt the soul, reducing it to a state of putrefaction. But in addition to gluttony, he was also credited with pride, the very foundational sin that cast Lucifer from heaven. Beelzebub, with his newfound status and ability to command legions, could not be devoid of this attribute. His pride manifested in his grandeur, in his claim to a place beside Lucifer himself, in his ability to tempt souls to self-aggrandizement and defiance of divine commandments. And, of course, his appearance underwent dramatic transformations, reflecting his growing horror and malevolent power. Grimoires and demonological treatises were filled with varied, sometimes contradictory, but always repulsive descriptions. Sometimes he appeared as a monstrous, colossal fly, its giant legs scraping the air, its thousands of multifaceted eyes seeing every weakness and every vice at once. In other instances, he was a winged beast whose membranous wings seemed to carry not just wind but the stench of decay and plague. Or, even more frighteningly, he could assume a humanoid form but with disturbing, insect-like features, deathly pale skin, compound eyes, prominent mandibles, slender antennae, a mouth resembling a fly's proboscis, or even chitinous plates piercing through his skin, as if he were slowly transforming into something alien and vile. These images were designed to instill unimaginable fear and profound revulsion, to emphasize his otherness from the human world and his sinister, defiling nature. Beelzebub's status as a mighty prince of hell was undeniable. It was believed he could not just summon but command entire legions of demons, sending them to sow chaos, disease, madness, and debauchery across the earth. His name was invoked in the most terrifying stories of possession, becoming a synonym for uncontrollable evil. In the 17th century, during the infamous Loudun possessions in France, one of the most famous cases of mass possession in history, Beelzebub was named one of the three principal demons tormenting the nuns, alongside Leviathan and Asmodeus. These were not just legends, they were real, documented cases where his name was spoken in court, at the stake, and in the convulsions of exorcism, cementing his status in the popular consciousness and theological debates. And in 1667, in John Milton's monumental epic poem Paradise Lost, Beelzebub appears not merely as one of the demons, but as a powerful, cunning, and influential fallen angel, second in power and wisdom only to Satan himself. Milton portrays him as one who, despite his defeat, retains a part of his heavenly glory. His mind is unbroken, and he is capable of inspiring other demons to fight on, to hatch insidious plots against the divine order. He was an architect of infernal plans, one of Satan's chief advisors, always ready to propose the most cunning and sophisticated strategy. His influence extended far beyond that of a simple harbinger of disease. He became a symbol of absolute, calculating, almost intellectual evil. Thus, by the dawn of the modern era, Beelzebub had transformed from a modest Philistine deity into a formidable figure whose name induced shudders and whose place in the infernal hierarchy was firmly established. He was no longer just the Lord of Flies, but the Lord of entire legions, a prince of darkness whose influence stretched into the murkiest corners of human fear and sin, and in the tumultuous, superstitious reality of the 17th century when the line between faith and fanaticism was razor thin and the fear of the devil was a tangible part of daily life, this horror took on a concrete, terrifying form. It manifested in mass possessions that shook the very foundations of European society and solidified Beelzebub's truly diabolical reputation. France, 1634. The quiet, pious town of Loudun, seemingly an ideal place for peaceful existence, suddenly became the epicenter of events that would go down in history as one of the darkest and most tragic episodes of demonic hysteria. At the center of the storm were the nuns of the local Ursuline convent. Their peaceful lives turned into a nightmare as, one by one, they began to show signs of a violent, inexplicable possession. It started with spasms and convulsions, then came unexplained pain and inhuman screams. Soon, this was joined by blasphemy, sacrilegious speech, and obscene gestures completely at odds with the behavior of devout nuns. Their bodies contorted into impossible positions, their voices twisted beyond recognition, spewing curses and secrets they could not possibly know. To the terrified witnesses and clergy, the answer was obvious. This was not an ailment of the body, but of the soul. These were demons. And among these infernal entities, summoned to torment innocent souls and sow chaos, a trio of evil stood out, a truly unholy trinity, led by Beelzebub himself. During their agonizing exorcisms, the nuns cried out the names of their tormentors. Again and again, the names Beelzebub, Leviathan, and Asmodeus were heard. Leviathan, the ancient sea monster, was often associated in demonology with chaos, heresy, and primordial darkness, capable of sowing discord and doubt. Asmodeus, the demon of lust, wrath, and destruction, was blamed for corrupting souls and inciting sin. But it was Beelzebub, the prince of demons from the New Testament, the Lord of Flies, a name once belonging to an ancient Philistine deity and later synonymous with rot decay, and the sins of gluttony and pride, who was named the chief and most powerful of the demons possessing the nuns. He was believed to be not just one among them, but their supreme commander, able to summon and direct entire legions of lesser spirits who obeyed his will as flies obey their master. His very presence in Loudun symbolized the highest degree of diabolical invasion. Gruesome public exorcisms became commonplace, turning Loudun into a theater of fear. Clergymen, including the soon-to-be infamous Urbane Grandier, attempted to cast out the demons. The nuns screamed, writhed in fits, and claimed that the demons, especially Beelzebub, were forcing them into terrible sins and apostasy. All of this unfolded before a huge crowd, hungry for spectacle and utterly convinced of the reality of what was happening. Under torture and pressure, the demons, speaking through the nuns, began to expose their sworn enemy Urbane Grandier, a charismatic local priest accused of sorcery and making a pact with the devil. It was he, they claimed, who had unleashed these demons upon the nuns out of revenge or malice. The events at Loudun became a horrifying example of how a deep-seated fear of the supernatural, combined with political intrigue, church rivalries, and personal enmity, could lead to unimaginable tragedies and judicial farces. The interrogations, tortures, and endless exorcisms aimed at expelling Beelzebub and his cohorts were not just religious rituals. They were public spectacles that only reinforced belief in the power of these demons and justified the most brutal methods of combating them. In the end, Grandier was found guilty on charges based solely on the testimony of the possessed nuns and was burned at the stake on August 18, 1634. However, the possessions continued for several more years, flaring up with new bouts of hysteria, confirming that the devil was still at large. For the public consciousness of the time, the Loudun possessions were not some dark fairy tale or a theological debate fit only for scholars. They were living, screaming proof that Beelzebub was not an abstract figure from ancient myths or medieval demonological treatises. He was a real, menacing force capable of invading daily life, destroying the minds and bodies of the innocent, and sowing chaos and terror in entire cities. His name, once denoting the Philistine god Baal-Zebub or a derogatory pun, now evoked a genuine, paralyzing fear and was associated with the darkest, most active manifestations of evil. These events not only fortified his position in the infernal hierarchy as one of the most powerful princes of hell, but also forever inscribed his name in the annals of human history, a name that echoed in the screams of the possessed, the smoke of pyres, and the panicked terror of the people. Beelzebub, the Lord of Flies, had finally become the Lord of Fear. It was this very Lord of Fear, whose name had changed and gathered new meanings over the centuries, who received his most magnificent and influential literary embodiment in the 17th century. We are talking about John Milton's monumental epic poem, Paradise Lost, published in 1667. This work didn't just retell the biblical story of the fall of man. It forever cemented Beelzebub's status as one of the greatest figures of evil in Western literature, elevating him from the shadows of lesser demons to the level of a virtual co-ruler of hell. In Milton's work, Beelzebub is not just a name or an archetype. He is a powerful, cunning, and extraordinarily influential fallen angel, second in power, wisdom, and perhaps even in the tragic scale of his fall, only to Satan himself. When we first meet him in the poem, he is not presented as a minor imp or a master of insects, but as a majestic figure, though scarred by pride. He is described as next him in crime, but next in power. His image is monumental. Milton paints him as having a countenance sage and resolute, and a front of deliberation and public care. Beelzebub's key role is revealed in the famous infernal council held in Pandemonium, the capital of hell built by the fallen angels. After their defeat in the war in heaven and their fall into the abyss, the demons, gathered under Satan's leadership, seek ways to take revenge on God. It is here that Beelzebub's strategic mind is displayed in all its diabolical genius. First, Moloch speaks, calling for open war, a frontal assault on heaven, a battle to the death. Then Belial, a proponent of sloth and inaction, suggests simply accepting their new reality, believing the worst is already over. But Beelzebub, with his deep thoughts and princely counsel, proposes something far more sophisticated and insidious. His speech is not hot and emotional like Moloch's, nor is it conciliatory like Belial's. It is cold, calculating, and filled with a deep understanding of the psychology of both demons and the divine order. He suggests not direct confrontation, but a hidden, vile war, a war through the seduction and destruction of God's new creation, man. There is a place, he says, another world, the happy seat of some new race called man. His idea is to infiltrate this new world, be it Earth or some other realm, and corrupt humanity, causing it to fall. In doing so, they would not only take revenge on God by striking at his beloved creation, but they might also gain new allies in their eternal struggle. This is not just destruction, it is corruption, a far more sinister form of vengeance. Beelzebub's speech is not merely a suggestion. It is a meticulously crafted strategy that considers the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. He knows that a direct confrontation with God is doomed to fail, but seduction and guile can give them an advantage. It is he who articulates the darkest and most promising idea, which essentially becomes the foundation for all of hell's subsequent plans. His proposal immediately resonates with Satan and the other fallen angels, instantly transforming despair and chaos into a focused, albeit doomed, struggle. Milton doesn't just make Beelzebub Satan's second in command. He makes him the chief architect of the war against God, a kind of dark strategist. This Beelzebub is the embodiment of evil's intellectual power, its capacity for planning, deceit, and manipulation. He is not just a mighty warrior, but a wise, perceptive politician and schemer capable of shaping the decisions of other demons, channeling their rage and despair into a meaningful, long-term war. Thus, Milton's Paradise Lost not only deepened and dramatized the character of Beelzebub, but also solidified his status not as a mere Lord of Flies, but as a great demon of thought, cunning, and strategic malice. He became a symbol of intellectual power directed toward destruction, the personification of that dark wisdom that seeks to undermine the order of creation from within. In this work, Beelzebub was finally transformed into a canonical figure whose name evokes not just an image of disease or possession, but a sense of deep, calculated, and influential evil. It was this transformation of the character from ancient deity through biblical demonization and medieval grimoires to Milton's powerful, calculating strategist that found its most vivid and piercing echo in the 20th century. For even as belief in literal demons began to fade, humanity still needed a symbol for the dark force that corrupts the soul and pushes toward destruction. And this symbol found new life, unexpectedly returning to its original, literal meaning. In 1954, the world was introduced to William Golding's famous novel, which bears a title that still sends a shiver down the spine, Lord of the Flies. Golding, with a keen sense of symbolism and the deep meaning of ancient names, deliberately turned to the image of Beelzebub. But whereas Beelzebub was once an external enemy, a fallen angel or a prince of demons, in Golding's interpretation, he became something far more terrifying than embodiment of the primal savagery and evil lurking not in the depths of hell, but within man himself. The novel's plot is simple and all the more brutal for it. A group of English schoolboys, evacuated during a war, survives a plane crash and finds themselves on a deserted island. Far from the world of adults, laws, and civilization, the boys must build their own society. But instead of a utopia, their world gradually descends into chaos, violence, and primitive fear. Golding's Lord of the Flies doesn't just allude to the name Baal-Zebub, the ancient Philistine deity from Ekron, whom the prophet Elijah branded as the Lord of the Flies, and later to the New Testament's Prince of Demons, Beelzebub. No, the novel makes this image physically tangible, even revolting. The key image of the novel, its central metaphor, and the incarnation of evil becomes the severed head of a pig impaled on a stake and left in a clearing as an offering to the beast, an imaginary monster living on the island. This head, quickly covered in swarming flies, becomes the literal, physical Lord of the Flies. It rots, exuding a foul stench, and the buzzing flies create a gruesome parody of a crown above this disgusting trophy. But the true horror lies not in the head or the flies themselves. They are merely a mirror reflecting the inner darkness that is growing in the boys' hearts. Through the hallucinations of one of the characters, Simon, the pig's head speaks to him, claiming to be the beast, not some external monster, but an inseparable part of the children themselves, the embodiment of their untamed aggression, cruelty, and fear. "I'm the reason why it's no-go," whispers the Lord of the Flies, and this revelation becomes the novel's central philosophical message. Evil is not an external curse, not a demonic possession as in the medieval concept of Beelzebub, who was linked to gluttony and could inflict plagues, much like flies carry contagion. It is immanent, it lives within every human being, and it only takes the thin veneer of civilization to be stripped away for it to burst forth. Golding returns us to the literal meaning of Beelzebub's name, Lord of the Flies, and fills it with the deepest psychological and philosophical significance. The flies, originally associated with disease and decomposition, now symbolize inner rot, the decay of moral values, and a reversion to primal instincts. They swarm not a sacrificial animal, but the human soul itself when it succumbs to fear and rage. Beelzebub, therefore, ceases to be a figure of myth and legend. He becomes a metaphor for the universal human propensity for barbarism, cruelty, and self-destruction. He doesn't tempt. He simply is, manifesting when external structures are shattered and man is left alone with his own untamed nature. It is in this modern interpretation that the image of Beelzebub, or the Lord of the Flies, reaches its darkest and truest culmination. From an ancient deity whose name may have originally meant prince or even protector from flies, to a biblical fiend, and finally to a shocking symbol of internal darkness, this figure has traveled a path of millennia. It serves as an eternal reminder of the fragility of civilization and of the fact that the most terrifying demon may not be in hell, but lurking in the depths of the human heart. And if we are not vigilant, the Lord of the Flies is always ready to reveal himself in all his repulsive, primitive power. This journey through the millennia, from a revered deity to the embodiment of absolute evil, reveals a profound truth. Evil is not always an external, unchanging force. It is a shifting reflection, shaped by our fears, our stories, and the very language we use to describe the shadows around and within us. The transformation of a god into a symbol of all-encompassing corruption is a mirror of humanity's eternal attempt to define and confront the darkness. So, if a god can become a demon, and an external horror can become an internal truth, could it be that the most terrifying Lord of the Flies isn't in ancient myths, but in the unexplored depths of the human heart? What do you think of this fascinating journey through the ages? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next deep dive into history and philosophy, and hit the like button if this video made you think. Until next time.